According to many, the vintage motorcycle market is dying. And today I want to talk about my opinions and what I think is going to happen with old British bikes more primarily and Japanese bikes going into the future. It seems like the market has had a very big softening when it comes to bikes from the 50s and 60s, primarily from England, but also the bikes from the 70s are starting to see a little less interest as time goes on with the entire community. Are these bikes that were once trading for $30, $40, even $100,000 going to be worthless in the future? That's the question many people are asking. Now, no one has a definite answer as to what is actually going to happen, but from a younger person's perspective, here's what I think is going to happen with these British bikes as time goes on. In recent years, we've been seeing younger people like myself go away from these British bikes and primarily, which is the focus I want to do in this video, but we're still going to address 70s Japanese bikes because those are also on a downward trend. We're seeing my generation hover towards the bikes from the early to mid 2000s and up. Even the generation above myself is focusing on the bikes in the 90s instead of the bikes that people have loved before from the 50s and 70s. Values across the board are dropping and many owners aren't willing to accept that fact. And the ones who are losing a lot of money depending on when they bought the bikes. Now here's my opinion on everything that's going on. It's not quite as shallow as everyone thinks it is, that the newer generation isn't buying these older bikes and the older generation, these insane prices will die with them. The upkeep, the enthusiasm is going to die with people who are now 60, 70, 80 years old. I don't think that's true whatsoever because there is a generation under that generation that still loves those same bikes. And that generation is the generation that's into the 70s and 80s bikes that in the last 10 years or so have really gone crazy in value. In recent years, we've even seen Kawasaki Z1 and the H2 bring record-breaking numbers in auctions. But that's also kind of a false hope as to how the market is going, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. The big thing about the market, the big trend, the big trajectory is the British market on its way down. We've seen bikes like the Gold Star and the Vincent drop in value and have less enthusiasm. When we talk about British bikes versus Japanese bikes, British bikes were produced in the hundreds or thousands. Very rarely there's a model that has been produced in the tens of thousands. But when we're talking about Japanese bikes, especially Hondas, they sold over 25,000 CBXs. And the CBX was considered to be a fail. They sold hundreds of thousands of the models that they create. Of course, they have their rare models. Honda has rare bikes. Even the bike sitting behind me was produced in the few thousands. But when we're talking about bikes like the CB750, the Z1, the H2, those bikes were produced in the tens of thousands. So British bikes are rare, and a lot of people have control over the market. It's not hard to build a monopoly. Look at Jay Leno, for example, on a certain model. Jay Leno probably has 20% of all the Bruff Superiors, maybe even more than that. There's only a few hundred of them in existence. He's got like 20 of them. Generation in kind of Jay Leno's age group are the generation that primarily own these bikes. And as they're starting to get older, those bikes are very demanding. There isn't a push-button start, all of them are very mechanical, and you gotta work on them in order to even get them running and riding, and they have a lot of compression. It takes a lot to kick over an old British bike, especially a bike like the Vincent Black Shadow. The bikes are starting to age, but more primarily the owners are aging faster than the bikes, and they're sitting collecting dust. Many of these old British bikes my generation has never seen. And that is a huge part of everything that is going on in the current market. Because these bikes are so few, because many were destroyed throughout the many years, they aren't existing in the market, at bike meets, at shows. I've seen one Bruff Superior in my lifetime, and that's because I got lucky to just stumble across one. I've also only seen maybe 2 Gold Stars, and one of them I own. That's so, when we're talking about these bikes, they don't exist. The owners are keeping them hidden. They've been hidden for about a decade. And unless you're specifically going out to vintage bike meets or looking for these bikes, you can walk right past one at a show and you won't even pay attention to it because there's maybe one there. In my area, we do Superbike at Road America every single year, and there wasn't a single British bike on display. There was a Z2, there was an RC51, there was a Fireblade, there was a ZXR 750, but there were not a single British bike on display. And then when the show came around on Saturday, there was one bike and it was an old Triumph Cub Scrambler. Nothing wrong with that bike. I love the bike, right? But there wasn't like a Golden Flash. There was not a single BSA there. There were some old Airheads, but there weren't any Norton, BSA. There was nothing of the sort. So when my generation never sees these bikes, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they look like. We never get up close and personal. We never have experiences with them. We're not going to pay $100,000 for a Black Shadow. If we don't know what a Black Shadow is, if we've never seen a Black Shadow, never had a personal, any kind of attachment, know anyone with one, we're never going to pay up for a bike like that. The reason why things go crazy in value is because, number one, they're worth something and something special, but number two, they're special to the people because they have experience with them. Obviously, a bike like a Black Shadow was the fastest production bike, one of the craziest things that came out of the 50s in England, and it's a blue chip collector bike like the BSA Gold Star, but when you never experience them, you've never rode one, you've never even seen one, never heard one running, you don't understand what the bike is about, and you don't know anyone who has one. Anytime I talk to an older person that has experience with bikes, they're always telling stories about their experiences with these bikes. We don't have experiences, we don't have stories with the bikes. And when there isn't any of that enthusiasm going around, because a bike like my Gold Star, for example, it's been sitting in the guy's garage for about a decade, barely rode maybe once or twice a year around the block, and that's it. It was never taken to shows, it was never rode down the street to go get coffee, it was never taken to the gas station. It never had any of those things that build enthusiasm. And that, I feel like, has been lost primarily with the British bikes in the last 5 years or so. Now, to move on to the Japanese bikes, these bikes, I think, went up like crazy. They had a good market, and now they're kind of calming down. They're coming into a middle ground where they are more reasonable because, again, there's a lot of CB750s. There's no reason for a CB750 in bad condition to be $5,000. A nice CB750, of course, it takes money to preserve a bike, it takes money to restore a bike, and all those things, so they should be worth multiple $1,000s, even upwards towards $10,000, depending on the year and all of the other things. But when some of these bikes like Kawasaki Z1s are hitting $40,000 at auction, it makes people think that have one sitting in the corner of their garage, think their bike is worth $30,000. The other day I saw a Z1, non-original exhaust, not restored, a good runner bike, but missing an exhaust, sitting for years, got it running, and he wants $35,000 for it. Maybe 2 years ago, a nice one would have brought $25,000. The economy just isn't there. And that's the second point I want to get at. The economy has fallen a lot. The peak for a lot of these bikes was around 2018. The H2 recently broke a record at Mecum. The Z1 recently broke a record at Mecum. But those bikes, I see it all the time. Bring a trailer, people are buying them for 30 grand, and now they're listed on the market for like 18,000 and they're still not selling. They're, in my opinion, in my eyes, they're just leveling out to a more reasonable price point. Now, just like the British bikes, the Japanese bikes are also being hidden. A lot of the Japanese bikes were ruined even though they made them by the tens of thousands, so some bikes are getting rare. Good examples are getting hard to find, especially with two-strokes. But with the rise of the prices in the bikes, a lot of them came out of the woodwork and flooded the market. 2018, people were buying motorcycles, people had extra money to spend. The economy was in a great position. Now with the high interest rates, all of those things, not to make this video about the current state of the economy, but the economy is slower. People are spending less, interest rates are higher, cost of regular day items is more than it was a few years back, and a lot of the country is struggling. That makes things like vintage motorcycles a hobby, an extra in your life, a lot cheaper because there's less people who are buying. Now, I suspect as these BSAs, the old vintage bikes, start to come out of the woodwork and they start to get a little cheaper, that people my age are going to start to appreciate them more and more. we get our own experiences. When they get a little cheaper, more people will be willing to buy and more people's eyes will be turned on to them. And then the market will go back up, as well as the economy. Everything swings up and down. And this is not the end of the British bikes or the British bike market or the 70s Japanese market. But what this is a huge dip. And hopefully this dip will allow bikes that have gone crazy for no reason to level out a little bit and for everyone to kind of calm down on trying to get top of the line results for your bike that is not a top of the line bike. The economy plays a huge factor into it. Everything is slow, but yes, these British bikes, more primarily the British bikes, have gotten soft. The market is not where it was, and it will not be there for a decent amount of time. When the economy swings up, I suspect the British bike market will also speed back up. And the reason I suspect that is because the generation that currently owns most of the bikes that are in their 70s, 80s, maybe even 90s that can no longer ride the bikes, they might own them and they're probably going to sell them, and unfortunately their time has come and many of them are collecting dust. As these bikes get brought back into the market, not only will my generation and the generation above my generation see these bikes and learn and appreciate them in a new way. If you haven't seen my video on the Gold Star, make sure to go check it out. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions as always in the comment section. And with that being said, if you're new to the channel, leave a like and subscribe. And as always, I will see you guys in the next video.